So when I was 22, that was about 48 years ago, my boyfriend and I were in Puerto Rico on a surf trip, and I had gotten caught on some inside waves that were 10 to 12 feet, pretty big, thick, powerful, that were pushing me down into the bottom of where there are caves underneath the water. And it was a drowning accident. Eventually, I had been pushed into a rock and was pulled from my body um, through my head first. And I had experienced an outer body experience where I could actually, I felt like I was pulled in and made big to participate in the um, big, bigger part of the universe instead of just my body. Because when I was pulled out of my body, the immediate thing that I experienced was that I could see my face and I could see my body drowning. And then I could also see my body that I identify as a spirit that was immediately went towards this divine light where Jesus was and where my father was. And then the face that I saw that was observing everything, which I identify as my soul, then joined my spirit and combined to observe a life review that I was going through with Jesus on the right side and my father on the left side of an old-fashioned white screen that with a 35 projector that was sitting in the back of me. And I was on this bench, and the bench, I wasn't really sitting on it. I would say I was hovering over it as I was watching my life review. And in back of the big white screen, there was a tunnel. And down the tunnel, I could hear these entities. It seemed like there were several hundred beings down there that kept asking and chanting, "Is she coming? Is she coming?" And then there was this shadowy being that would walk down the tunnel and ask my father, who was kind of also too floating in a cloud-like form, if I was coming. And then he would look over to Jesus and see, what's happening. And Jesus would then acknowledge that patience, we don't know yet, just patience. So this was all telepathically going on. And at the same time that this was happening, my life review was going on, as well as I could see my body and somebody yelling on the beach that there is a woman drowning. Let's go save her. So then 5 people gathered basically to risk their life to come save me from the big waves. And also, too, I could see there was like a fire in another kind of dimension. It seemed like there were overlaps of dimensions of things that were happening. And I could see animals like giraffes and wild animals running from a fire. I could see like Indian women that were crying and that there was not enough clean, safe water for their children to have. And in my life review that I was observing on the white screen, it started from the moment that I was seeing my body in the water, and it was like warp speed. And it brought me also to with experiences that I had had with people that I might not have been very kind to, that I could feel their hurt and their pain from things I might have said to them, ways I might have mistreated them, or not being kind. And then I would eventually, my life review ended with me as a young child before I was born, as a spiritual being, riding on a white horse, and a voice saying that it was time for me to be born. I didn't want to be born. And I said, but I don't want to go. And the voice had said, but you had chosen these parents to learn your lessons of perseverance and resilience. And then the next thing I knew, and so also too, through this whole life review, of course, it was like a blink of an eye, which seemed like it went on for a long time. But at the same time, this shadowy being that's going down, back and down the tunnel, to answer if I'm coming from these entities that are waiting for me to come down the tunnel, which felt like they were there to greet me, that I had lived, other lives or gone through other experiences with them. And then at the end of that experience, the most important thing I totally forgot about was next to me on the bench was this white, bluish light that seemed like lightning. It was big. I knew if I put my hand out and I touched it, I would get electrocuted. It was so close. And it was very, very warm. And as I'm going through that experience, I'm very afraid because I don't know what's going on. But I'm also, too, being overwhelmed with love that I've never experienced in my life before. And at the end of the experience, I was thrown back into my body because it wasn't time for me to go down through the tunnel, and told to tell everybody that I am, and that time is of an essence. Right. So when I was pulled out, when I was thrown back into my body, and then I was under the water, and there was a gentleman, probably a surfer, that said, give me your hand. And so I gave him my hand, and he passed me down, in a chain. And then I went to the beach and I collapsed. And then my boyfriend at that time had been called from the water. And when he came to me, I tried to tell him what was going on. And he had whispered and said, don't ever tell anybody that because they'll lock you up in a mental institution. So right away, I felt like, I can't talk about this. And then I went into shock and I was rushed to the hospital. I would say for probably 3 to 5 years, it took me a while to feel comfortable to even talk about it with anybody. And even, before that, I was trying to find things to read that I could relate to. Has anybody else gone through this? Am I hallucinating? What is this about? And I came across Edgar Casey, who had experienced also too a drowning incident when he was a young boy. And when he explained his experience, it was very similar to what I had experienced. So I felt like, okay, well, there's got to be other people too that have had these experiences. So I would say for 10 years, I was really looking for other people that I could read or that I could relate to that would have similar experiences to that. The learning from that experience was that I was loved and that I was always loved. As a child, I grew up in with two parents who were wounded themselves trying to, parent. They both were physically and verbally abused. So the tools that they had were limited. They did the best that they could with what they had. But at that time, I always felt that my father was not really my father. He never, hugged me, never said he loved me. So that was why, in my experience, I was very surprised when I felt such warmth and love that was coming from him. So right away, I had a different attitude toward my parents. I knew that in their own way, as dysfunctional as it might be, as earthly beings, that they tried the best that they could. But they were limited with what they had for parenting. And so I felt that I had a better understanding of who they were and where they were coming from. And so I wasn't angry or resentful for them, which was a huge weight off my shoulders moving through life, not having to carry that anger or resentment towards them. They did the best they could. I had chosen them. I was told in my experience that I had chosen them to be my parents, and I believe that. And yes, I have, from them being my parents, I have learned resilience, and it's all been good. It's all been good. He had died a year earlier. He had died a year earlier. So as a child, and I think there's a lot of science also too now around this, that children who um, grow up in very traumatic situations, they're super sensitive because they learn to navigate through trauma, and they spend a lot of time inside utilizing their senses to their environment. And so as a young child, oftentimes I would ask my parents, "Are you sure that you're really my parents? You don't act like my father." And they would get very upset and send me to my room or punish me. But I did find out that the shadowy being, through DNA testing, was was my biological father. That my mother did not want to admit to me when I had asked her about it. And then finally, before she died, she did admit that my father that I grew up with was not my growing up father, that in fact, that this shadowy being, after I saw a photo of him, that um, confirmed that he was my biological father. And then I approached my mother, and she finally admitted that, yes, he is your biological father. So, that all kind of unraveled, the truth of that unraveled 5 years ago. And so this was an experience that I had 48 years ago. And I've written a book, a memoir, that I talk about in a lot more detail about this experience that will be coming out. Well, I was told that it was my choice, that I had chosen my parents to incarnate through in order to learn resilience and perseverance. And I think during that time, I I didn't want to go because I was having so much fun being where I was, and I sensed that I probably knew that coming back to Earth, the density and the weight of it all, and the challenges of it all was going to be difficult, and that I wasn't going to be as free um, as I felt at that moment riding on my white horse and being called that it was my time to be born. I did grow up a Catholic, so probably that imprint of having Jesus in my experience as opposed to, say, Buddha or some other religious icon. I felt in the experience that I felt safe, and Jesus kept telepathically telling me that everything was going to be okay. That I was okay because I was so scared and I was shaking, from what was going on. But it was really Jesus that was calming. But I remember as a child going to church, and it was my growing up father that basically grew up as a Catholic and insisted that my mother convert to being a Catholic when they got married. And we did go to church. I went to Catholic school for a little while, probably until I was fifth grade. I ended up going to church by myself for years. I went to catechism well into high school. And I always felt that Jesus was a safe person or a safe entity or being, spirit for me to speak with, to have conversations, to trust. I felt like really Jesus was the only person that really loved me at that time in my human life. Um, and he was there to greet me as the teacher Jesus, along with my father, and my near-death experience. It's interesting because when I was drowning and I knew I was dying, I was praying to God saying, "Please don't take me. I'm not worthy enough." I never thought that I was worthy. And so going through that experience, it kind of confirmed how I felt, but I was the one that was judging myself. There was nobody, no other entities, God, Jesus, my father, shadowy being, or the people at the end of the tunnel that were judging me. It was all coming from me, um, and I felt bad. I felt like I don't want to. I don't want to be this person, you know. So that was part of the transformation coming back into my body. I knew that right then and there that I wanted to be my highest possible, best person, kindest, compassionate, and loving self that I possibly could be. I mean, I really don't have a scientific understanding. I think it's just lack of vocabulary, and I find that trying to find the right vocabulary to describe the experience is probably the biggest challenge of all. And so just pulling from vocabulary that I've heard or learned or, understand to help make sense or create a model that kind of makes sense and explaining it. So the dimensions, it just, I speak about that, we're in a third dimension, fourth dimension is time. People talk about all these, there, can be like 11 different dimensions, with different experiences going on in each dimension. So in the third dimension, here we are on the earthly plane. Fourth dimension would be like the spiritual world. And then you've got other dimensions that are part of the cosmos that we don't really know about, that seem to be all entangled like a spider web. And so in my experience, I felt like what I was observing and sensing, it seemed like I had these different organs of sense organs that I could feel and tell what was going on and see at the same time, as opposed to just having this conversation with you. And if we had 5 or 6 other things that are going on, and where's our focus going to be? It's probably going to try to be on one particular situation, as opposed to, for me at that time, I seemed to be able to see and sense everything that was going on, along, with these animals that I saw running from the fire, or women in India that, were crying because their children didn't have clean, safe water. They weren't able to, they were dying because of, waterborne diseases. I mean, for me, I took that as a message. So when I came back, I mean, I started a foundation called Women for Water, working with third world countries that didn't have clean, safe water, um, and teaching, women how to be able to be leaders in their communities where they can filter water for their village and be able to save time from having to walk with their children all day long looking for clean, safe water. And then also too, their children and them would be able to get an education and have clean water to drink and bathe and stuff in. And with the animals, that were running from the fire, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what that's really about. The only thing from that experience I can infer would be that, you know, that there's fires that are threatening, you know, for animals. Um, I remember reading Carl Jung, who also had a near-death experience where in his 30s, and he was hovering over the earth, and he said that he saw most of the earth burning except for one small patch of it. What that means for the environment the way that it is. Does that have anything to do with it? I mean, I don't really know. I don't know. It was just an experience. I do know that I feel that I do have this love and communications with animals, and compassions that I'm very awake and receptive to their communication with me when I'm with them. Yeah, yeah, the unseen world. I mean, I kind of think of it too in comparison, like animals, they see colors that we don't see, and it over time science has figured that out. But we all see in different ways, and I definitely know that there are things and experiences that are there and around us that we can sense and feel, but that we don't really know anything about it. Well, I mean, I was overwhelmed with that message. That, like, what on earth does it mean, I am that I am? I mean, I remember telling a friend, and she was saying, Lynn, my goodness, that's like a Moses in the burning bush message. Are you aware of that? And I go, yeah, but what does that really mean? I am that I am. um, and for me, from that experience, I am that I am means that there is no one way of looking at God. That God is not a white man with a white beard, long beard. There's no one way to believe that God, the divine, the universe, the cosmos, nature, it's all the same. And how we believe or practice to be in connection with the divine, there's no one right way. The right way is the way that's right for the person that's practicing that connection, as long as it's kind and loving and compassionate. I think it definitely has, because I definitely have a strong belief. I mean, I know I don't. Somebody asked, "Do you believe in God?" I mean, I know there's a God. I know there's a divine. I know there's something much bigger than us that has, created this, our beautiful selves, ourselves, the nature, everything around us. I know that there is. A higher force that's responsible for that, and that we're all entangled together. And the God that I believe in is a loving God. It was important for me to do it, to share my story, because it also too helped me work through it. As I had mentioned earlier, my family, growing up as a child, there was a lot of trauma, because my parents had experienced a lot of trauma also, and had limited tools with how to raise children, 8 children, in a loving, compassionate, and kind way. A lot of it was brute force that they had experienced themselves. So I felt like there were also, too, my near death experience. I, as a young child, had a high sense of intuition, where I could feel things that were not right, that would make me uncomfortable, um, that I would pull away from. And so I think writing the story, sharing some of my childhood experience, helped me understand in a deeper way what I had learned from my near death experience, especially during the dark soul of the night, where coming out of that and then realizing how transformed that the near death experience was for me. Well, the dark soul of the night looked like for me when, you know, I believed, in someone in a certain way, and then found out that, they had been lying to me all that time, and somehow I had missed the red flags indicating that. And then trying to understand why was I missing these red flags. But then afterwards, especially writing my story, understanding from my childhood that I basically had been gaslit my whole life, when I had asked the question several times if my father was really my father, and being told, a lie, and then having to think that it was me, there was something wrong with me, that I must not understand something. And then once it was revealed that what I really thought was the truth, you know, almost 50 years later, was actually the truth, it was a bit of an aha moment for me to understand that, oh, of course I'm going to miss these particular red flags that somebody's trying to pull the wool over my eyes, because that's been my whole life of, that I was made to feel that there was something wrong with me when I really felt like, that person is not being honest or truthful with me. And I think that experiencing and coming awake to that, and because I had my NDE, it helped me be able to process it in a more kind and compassionate way, because the people that were that had those particular qualities about them, I could see from their own childhood why they were behaving that way. So trying not to take it so personal, even though it was hurtful, but then understanding that they were children at one time too. And somewhere along the line, on their journey, they became, you know, um, unkind, or because of low self esteem or to protect themselves. And I think if I hadn't had my NDE experience, I wouldn't have probably felt that way. I would have been probably angry and upset and resentful and vengeful. I don't know when. It's with a publisher right now. I'm hoping it will be coming out soon, but people can find me on my LinkedIn page under Lynn Arches-Rappaport. I'm also on Instagram, Lynn Arches, Facebook, Lynn Arches Author. And so if you follow me, you'll be updated, and the announcement will be made when my book will be coming out. Also, too, you can find my story on IONS, the International Association of Near-Death Studies. And in the book, The Self Does Not Die, I am one of the research participants, and the story is 5.8, Is She Coming?